You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 410.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Outdoor Station. Right, there's been, a week since the last podcast, and things have been ticking along as the way they do with this new property we're getting. Obviously, the legal people are doing whatever it is the legal people do, drink tea, give you big bills, that sort of thing. And I'm having a meeting next week on site with Mr. Openreach about getting in some decent broadband. Did you know that it takes a month to get a meeting with Mr. Openreach? A month? Isn't that ridiculous? The government are telling you they're trying to get broadband into everybody and get everybody up to speed really, really quickly. But it's 2 weeks for it to go through BT, then you've got to sit and wait 10 days for it to go through Openreach, and then you've got to wait for the guy to do it. But anyway, time will no doubt deliver us the result in the end. But it's just a bit of a pain waiting around, knowing what you can and can't do. Now, people have been signing up for our newsletter. Thank you very much, everybody that's done so. I'm going to read a few names out in a second and a few suggestions. But just to let you know, we have moved along nicely with some of the suggestions so far. And I'm just going to read out a few of the names who will be appearing in some random form very soon. Nikki Spinks, Jasmine Paris, Stormy Norman, Alex Roddy, Wildcat Gear, Elpkit, and Emma Timmis. She ran across Africa. I've just got to catch up with her. So, who has signed up? Well, there's quite a few people signed up. I'm just going to read a few choice ones because they've made a few comments which are quite interesting. Randomly going through several pages of paper, we have Jason Herriot, who suggested Sarah Outen. Sarah Outen? Now, that's not a name that's familiar to me, so I shall Google her to see who she is. John Marshall, who thinks I should have a chat with the guy who walks up Helvellyn every day to check the weather forecast. Liam Had, Woo Woo in Sussex, a great camping spot. So I need to check that one out. Haven't done a lot on the camping spots just yet, to be fair, but I have done on the names where people want to hear a bit more. Ali Al Halliday from Canada, welcome, thank you. Some nice comments from Roger Brakel, who loves the podcasts. Ian Harbert just discovered Shepherd's Walks, and they look interesting. And he's also suggested Ronald Turnbull, Wild Camp, ? Now, I was supposed to have a Wild Camp with Ronald Turnbull, was it last year or this year? I think it was the beginning of this year. And unfortunately, dates, weather or something changed. And it's a real shame because I was really looking forward to it. Tony Wheeler, Sarah Jones, who suggested Phoebe Smith again, and Chris Townsend. Who else we got here? Mark Waters suggested OMM. Must get in contact with them. Alex Wilson, loving the podcasts. He suggested a small farm campsite in South Wales that allows semi-wild camping in the woods by the river. I can't quite read the email address, the website address, but I shall look into that one. Ian Galston, Tracker Tent, another one for Tracker Tent. William Logden, great stuff, keep up the good work. Kevin Smith wants to hear more from P. Wiglet and Andy Howell. Well, whatever happened to them? P. Wiglet is up in Yorkshire somewhere, and Andy Howell is in his bedroom. And Brian Jones. So there's a good handful of names there of people that have joined the newsletter. Thank you very much indeed. I'm pushing it really hard, as everybody knows, and there is a little promo piece in the middle of this podcast that just explains what you can do. But basically, join our newsletter. We can keep in touch with you with some of the things that's going to be happening very soon, and you can make suggestions as to companies, small little cottage UK companies that are of interest, places of interest as regards camping, and other people who may be interesting to talk to, you'd like to know a bit more about. So that's my list where we are at the moment. It's growing all the time, so you're in good company. Now, one person, George Griffin, suggested Quintin Lake regarding the perimeter.uk. As you will hear, it's a fascinating story, a fascinating project. Quintin is a very, very interesting and good photographer, and he's walking around the perimeter of the UK in a set of stages, and recording it in his own style. He's also done several other walks as well, which you can see on his website: Greenland, the Thames Walk, the Source of the Severn to the Sea, and the Cambrian Way, all of which are wonderful images, and he is a professional photographer who survives on selling his images. So do have a look, and if one takes your fancy, well, you know what to do. Press the button. So let's now go over to a conversation that I had with Quintin only last week, in fact, and he tells us more about the project.
So the Perimeter, which is a photographic project walking around the coast of Britain, so it's a 10,000 kilometre walk, which I'm doing in stages. And each day I'm trying to take a handful of photographs that I'm proud of that show the coast in a unique way. And it came about by lots of other long-distance walks in the UK. So when I was 20, I walked from Lansdowne to John O'Groats, and that led to a number of other walks. And in recent times, I combined photography with walking. And the first was a walk from the source of the Thames to London. And then that led to a longer walk from the Severn, from the source to the sea. And then the sea idea got under my skin. And when I was a child, I'd read John Merrill's book about walking around the coast. It had always been there on the shelf. And then I thought, well, I'd like to do a project like that to try and say something new about the British coast.
Okay, so we can just backtrack slightly. You are a commercial photographer with a specialism in architecture.
That's right, yeah.
With obviously a natural feel for the outdoors, as you explained.
Yeah.
The first walk you did then, the Thames, how did that particular one come about? Did that come out as a project, or was that just a personal escape or a holiday?
Well, actually, because I'd done sort of physically difficult projects in the Arctic and desert and sort of tough travels, and I got meningitis, and I was floored. I could hardly walk across the room, and I wanted to do something very gentle that was essentially flat, and that if I had a problem, I'd be able to get out easily. But I wanted to get back in my tent and do another walking project. So I kind of came with it with a very kind of very, very humble, gentle approach to it. And ironically, it turned out that kind of calmness translated into better work for me.
And from a photography point of view, did you approach it to... this is the listeners, obviously.
Yeah.
Did you approach it from a point of view of taking the beauty and sort of landscapes from a postcard picture type of look, or were you looking for more of an abstract approach?
Well, I tend to try and do a more abstract approach, but I try not to pre-visualise what I'm going to do until I get there. But about 3 days into it, I realised that I wanted to do a very abstract approach and focus mostly on the water and the reflections and the light. I mean, the Thames is beautiful, but it's not a grand, dramatic river like the Severn or Broad, something like the White Nile. It's not magnificent. It's gentle. So I found the best approach was to look at the small details of things, and then when you compare the subtlety at the beginning with London and how that changes, it gave an interesting series of work that worked together.
And you said it was actually quite a successful commercial project. So what was the audience for it?
Well, I didn't have a major plan for it. I just posted it on my blog and posted it on social media. But it seemed, I think people thought it was a new way of looking at the Thames. So it got shared extensively, and that led to a number of sales, which made me think it satisfied me creatively as well as commercially. So I thought, well, I should do more of this.
so there was a financial balance.
There was a financial part to it, definitely.
But that wasn't the intention.
That wasn't the intention at all. No.
Excellent. Okay. I know another one I know you've done before we come on to the Perimeter is the Ridgeway, which is an area or a walk which, although I haven't done it, it sounds very romantic to me.
Yes.
What was that like from a sort of a participation point of view?
Well, I highly, highly recommend it. It is. I mean, it's really stepping back into the most ancient part of the British Isles, and I mean, photographically, it was. I only took as a telephoto lens. I took a 400mm lens only for the whole thing, which traditionally for listeners that aren't photographers, that's what you'd tend to see, those big white lenses you see in sports grounds or for photographing birds or some motor racing. But the reason for that is that the Ridgeway is kind of quite gentle, but with these huge long views. So I was trying to compress the landscape and get these abstract, flattened versions of the sort of Wiltshire landscape as you're passing through. It's also very, very close to really big cities, but yet it feels like a world apart. So it's a wonderful experience. Yeah.
So you really did feel like you're walking in the paths of ancient feet.
Very much so, yeah. And there's all these ancient earthworks, and somehow because you're raised up and the cities sort of vanish a bit, it feels very much like that. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. So coming on to the perimeter, then, this is as I understood it from looking at your website, you'll set yourself a 5-year project.
Yes.
5-year project. So why did you, first of all, set it over 5 years, or rather than 1, 2, or 10?
Yeah. Well, there's pragmatic as well as artistic reasons. So the artistic reasons is I find that spending too long on a project, I kind of get burnout. It's like the idea that if you go to India and you see an extraordinary temple, after a week you don't notice it anymore. Yes, but yet if you went it just once every week, you'd be astonished again. So I find I can look at things fresher if I spend a more intense, shorter time on something. And I've done multi-month projects in the past, and it becomes a different kind of. It becomes much more of a sort of mental and physical endurance rather than something where you're coming with creative, fresh eyes. And it meant that I could keep my commercial work going because I'm away for, I expect in Scotland I'll maybe go for a month, but in the south of England, like tomorrow I'm going to Cardiff, to Barry, so that'll be a day trip, or like a week away. So the benefit of 5 years was that I'm away for 2 or 3 months of the year, which means for my family and commercially that's a sustainable thing. Whereas if I go away, I think I'd lose my clients and my partner.
Yes, always a balance, a fine balance, but certainly enjoyment rather than endurance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you started off in London. Now, how long ago was that now?
That was Easter last year.
Easter last year, yeah. And I think when I just looked at your blog, you're about 25% of the way through.
Yes, yeah.
So have you broken that down into sort of weeks at a time, or literally just like a couple of days here and then a week later, and that sort of randomness?
It's random based on transport links and what makes sense with the landscape. So the remoter parts of Cornwall, I went for 10 days. I think was the longest stretch. And it's just balancing the cost of the travel with the distance and the amount of time I'd lose to travel. So, I mean, from where I live, Kent was a long way away, so I did camp quite a bit along there too. Mm.
Well, I mean, just that aside, actually, I know you don't drive a car, so how have you found the infrastructure as regards travelling, getting to these coastal places, just as an aside?
Most of the time it's pretty easy. I really enjoy travelling by train and a bus, so I don't have a problem with the travelling time, but there are definitely bits like kind of maybe around Minehead or the north of Devon where public transport is very awkward. You're kind of going against the grain to do that. It'll be like a couple of trains and a bus, and then you've really spent most part of the day to get there.
Right. The landscape is obviously going to be one thing. No doubt the people you meet along the way as well. There must be a whole variety of characters that you've met.
Very much so, yeah.
And then I presume if you're wild camping, which we'll come on to in more detail a bit later, but there's also the discipline point of view, because I know myself that when you're doing a coastal walk, it's so easy to stop, look at the view and just absorb the moment, or talk to people, locals, and all of a sudden it's the end of the day. So how do you fit in the photography?
It is very difficult, and I do allow myself to just enjoy the moment and enjoy chatting to people if that seems right. But days can be different. There can be days that are maybe sort of flatter in terms of interest that I'd imagined, or there are some days where I'm very particular, that I want to get to a particular landmark for a particular time because the light is going to be right and the weather that day, and then I might be a bit more antisocial that day. But I do end up doing an awful lot of walking at night, especially as the days get shorter. So if I kind of muck up or enjoy myself too much, I catch up the miles at night with a head torch.
Oh my word! Okay. Oh, no, I was going to say, what about the research you must do to go into, as you say, planning where the light's going to be at a certain time and making sure you're there? Do you do a lot of work here before you go? Google Earth and all the rest of it.
A huge amount, yeah. So I'll look at the satellite map. I'll obviously look at the OS 1 to 25,000 maps. Then I'll look at the Wikipedia map for sites, and then I'll read guidebooks. And sometimes I'll choose to be surprised, but more often than not, I kind of like to know what's coming up so that I can know I need to get up early or leave, or sort of speed up to get to a certain place. Mm.
You're wild camping all the way, or as much as possible, I understand.
As possible, yeah.
Has that proved to be a bit of a problem at all, or is it fairly straightforward?
I love that. But you mean difficult physically or with sort of
the practical aspect of landowners or just people generally?
I always pitch as it's getting dark, and I always break camp as the light's rising. So, and I never camp within line of sight of any property. So that's how I try and keep out of trouble, as it were. And with that approach, I haven't had any problems at all. In terms of finding a flat, suitable pitch, most of the time that's fine. I mean, it's a single one-man tent. I mean, even I've sometimes just been right next to the path because it's been a patch big enough. Water's a problem, especially by the coast, because it's runoffs from agricultural land. So I'm not sure even the best filters, I would trust them to get rid of agricultural chemicals. So water's been the biggest headache so far.
I was going to come on to that. I mean, the few times I've done it, it's always been, actually, I can't see a tap anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I try and plan to get fill the 2 litre platypus early enough so that I can do that overnight without any problems.
Coming back to the photography then,
Yeah.
do you set yourself a certain target as regards the number of pictures you're going to take per day?
I don't, but it's been quite consistent that if it's a really bad weather day, it'll end up being 70 pictures. But and then it's a really stunning day weather-wise, and in terms of interest, it will be 500 or 600. So the average has been about 300 pictures a day.
Now, we were talking about the camera you're using. I think it's a 50 megapixel
That's
camera.
Right, yeah. So it's because I produce and sell large format prints, so the resolution is very important for this work. So I use a Canon 5 DSR, which is currently the largest resolution full frame camera out there, and it's weatherproof and suitable for backpacking, although it's quite heavy.
Well, as we've come on to sort of the photography aspect, but I'm just thinking purely from my own experience, a 50 megapixel image, and you're taking several hundred a day. How do you back things up as you go along? Do you have a separate hard drive or some sort of system?
No, I don't. I've never had a problem with a SD card being corrupted. I mean, I baby them physically. They're sort of double protected against water when I'm in the field. But when I get home, I do back them up. And of those 300, I let it down to 10 or 20 of the day that I'm proud of. And then I often bin the ones that I didn't make the shortlist. And then of that 20, maybe 1 or 2 I would produce as a print.
Wow. Just thinking about the sheer numbers.
Yeah.
If you're talking 400 or 500 a day and you're away for 10 days, that's, 5,000.
Yeah.
Your discipline, your editing discipline must be quite ruthless when you come back. Do you just sort of see them all as icons on the screen and quickly go through just impulse when you make a decision, or do you study each one individually?
I still wish I was quicker at that process than I am, but I use Adobe Lightroom, and then I rate them with a star rating with the keyboard, and I go through them individually, and if it's rubbish, I'll just delete it, and then I'll rate it either a 3 or 4 star if I like it, and then I just... and then that probably reduces the number to about 30%, but I still find that it's a sort of binary process that if there's a strong series, I just have to bring 2 up on the screen and compare them both, and then go, is this one better than that one? And it's quite laborious, and I do that for a series. And then sometimes I just have to go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and then press the delete button on one. So I find it difficult, and my wife helps a lot with that, and I ask other friends sometimes too, if I get stuck.
Decision by committee.
Yeah.
So you started from London and you headed south. From the journey so far, what would you say the impressions different counties have given you? The sort of feel, the vibe of the place, the pace, the sort of temperament of the countryside?
Each phase has been completely different. I mean, I kind of liken it to being like a sort of opera, that each act is completely different to the point where it's almost sort of been choreographed to make it interesting. So, you have Cornwall with the rugged classic beaches, the history there, and then just as you've had enough of that, it becomes something different. You get to Exmoor, and then just as when you've almost had enough of nature, then you get to Wales and you get the industry and a whole different aspect of history and the poetry, and then the South England, you've got the different layers of history and the Second World War and the Henry VIII, and so it's been fascinating, each different area.
Has anything surprised you in the journey which you didn't anticipate at all?
Almost all of it, but I mean, I was very, very surprised how much I enjoyed Kent, so close to London, and how otherworldly that seemed around the Isle of Grain. And I mean, Turner was particularly keen on Kent because places like Margate, because you have the sea on both sides of quite a narrow, flat piece of land, so the light reflects off the clouds in a particular way. It's very interesting and luminous spaces. But But I found, so the light was very interesting, but also the places like Dungeness, just extraordinary otherworldly places. I mean, I particularly like creatively where you have power station industry right next to the kind of natural beauty. So you can, and in Kent, say you can go from, you walk past a firing range and you see people running around pretending to blow up houses, and then you walk to Camber Sands and there's a beach full of people doing kite surfing, and then you it's just the contrasts are kind of slightly mind bending, and you sleep well at the end of a day like that.
The Outdoor Station is your one-stop shop for audio and video entertainment for the self-powered traveller. You can find us online, on internet radio, on smartphones, on smart TVs, on YouTube, on Apple TV, on Now TV, and on Facebook. You can also stream us live via the iTunes app or TuneIn radio app. The list is continually expanding, and for full details of how to subscribe, download or stream and enjoy our massive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk. Surely as you do these travels, the further you walk between car parks,
yes,
you must see a different type of person on your travels.
Yes, I think it's fair to say the further from the car park, the greater the rapport with the people I meet are. And you meet people who are often like charmingly local, who've spent most of their life within a few kilometres, who are embedded in that piece of land. I find that like a beautiful thing, really. And they always have the time of day and a kind of peace about them, and that they always have interesting stories about their particular patch of land.
And do they show a lot of interest in the project itself?
It varies. Some people think it's a bit crazy, but a surprising number of people I meet go, I've always wanted to do that. I mean, really a very surprising number of people, or somehow it captures people's interest. I don't know why. Maybe it's about, the British do love their coast, and many people do love walking, so maybe it's they sort of see the value of it.
Maybe they're just envious of the time that obviously you're investing in it.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah.
And now the actual the coastal walk itself, obviously there are certain sections which you have awkward access to, shall we say. So what are the actual rules that you've set yourself as regards the actual task itself? And then what issues have you found so far as regards people who are very sensitive about a particular path or security or whatever?
Well, my kind of rules were I'm not taking any ferries or mechanical transport, so that means enormous detours around many of the estuaries and harbours. So Falmouth Harbour, for example, was a 3-day detour, the extra to what if you were doing the South Coast path in the traditional way. But my rules are to kind of follow the closest safe path to the coast that I can. And in Scotland, which I haven't got to yet, obviously, but I need to sort of readapt my rules because of the right to roam. But there's quite a number of obstacles and problems. So you get industrial land, you get very keen security guards. There's a lot of firing ranges. You have landowners that really don't care about the public footpaths, so they're blocked. Sometimes it seems quite intentionally, and barbed wire, overgrown paths. And then a lot of the coastal path actually is tidal, so you have to plan it so that you don't get caught up by the tide.
And have you found the security guards very sensitive these days, or are they a bit more realistic as regards the actual law? I
mean, they're extremely sensitive, but as a commercial architecture photographer, I have run-ins with security guards all the time. So the kind of letter of the law, I'm very familiar with it. So I tend not to back down unless they're stepping over their line. But some sites do have their own kind of actual police presence, and that's a different level. So and I don't photograph MOD sites or anything, which would be stupid anyway. But I feel industrial sites they're kind of a wonder of the modern world, and I'm very keen to document the industrial sites as I travel around the country.
And what's been the response generally to the work that you've done so far and produced out of this project?
It's been beyond my wildest dreams. People seem really interested and inspired by it, and I get emails and messages most days of saying how much it means to them, and people often, I post 2 pictures a day, and many people seem to really look forward to them. So it's been I mean, doing a project like this and having an audience and knowing that people are enjoying it makes makes it very fulfilling.
And what's your social media activity like? Because I know you've got your blog, but is it something you find, not say tiresome, but time-consuming to keep feeding the social media audience?
It's very time-consuming, but I see it as a essential part of making a success of being a self-employed creative person. So I mean, it's probably a day to two that I would commit each week in terms of hours to doing that. So I feed two unique images a day plus other material that's not all about me, that's related to art or coastal photography. And no, I enjoy interacting with people in that way. But yes, it's a commitment. Yeah.
So let's actually just come on to equipment in the two stages, really. Yeah. There's obviously the actual wild camping, there's sort of camping equipment, and the photography for the photographers amongst us who are listening and very curious to know what you've actually stripped it down to. Yeah. With your hiking experience anyway, I know that you have a fondness for the practical side of keeping the weight down. Yeah. So looking at the actual camping equipment, how do you limit yourself to that? Because I know you want to keep your rucksack down, or the weight of the final pack down to sub 15k, I should imagine, with all the equipment and everything, plus the water, of course. Yeah. So from a camping point of view, what actually do you take with you from a practical sleeping gear, cooking gear, and shelter?
I'm quite obsessive about the weight. I think my approach would probably be more akin to an American ultralight backpacker. So most of my gear would be kind of Cuban fibre. Like I use the cottage industry companies like Z Packs. So I use a framed Cuban fibre pack that weighs 480 grams, which is kind of astonishing. And then I use water bottles from the supermarket, and I use a Terra Nova mountain marathon tents, and I use a sort of 2 to 3 season sleeping bag, which I supplement with the warm clothes I'm wearing. And then I use a jet boil to cook. Although it's quite heavy, it only uses 4 or 5 grams of fuel to do a boil. So for a longer trip, it definitely is the lightest way to go.
So do you use commercial foods then? Just boil the water and drop the water in the commercial foods?
That's right. Well, actually, I don't cook so much. I tend to just make brews, and then I'll eat cold food. Or yes, as you say, I use commercial foods. Yeah.
So presumably then, if you have the opportunity, if there's a cafe or whatever, you'll eat and use that as main sustenance rather than keep carrying too much on the food side.
Very much so, yes. But again, in the remote parts of Wales, Scotland, I expect it will be 10 days pretty much self-sufficient, where I'll have to think much more carefully about this.
So I presume when you said the Terra Nova, you were talking about a laser competition tent.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Laser comp, okay. Yeah. And a 2-season bag and sleeping mat. What sort of sleeping mat do you use? I use the Thermarest Neo short, and then I use a kind of solid pad that's the back system of the backpack to do my feet. So my base pack weight is about 5 kilos, so that would be everything I need camping-wise, excluding food and fuel. So food and fuel would add about 2 or 3 kilos to that, and then the camera equipment would add 3 kilos to that. And one question that immediately comes to mind with any camping trip, we all go through it, what's been your best bit of kit and your worst bit of kit?
The Thermarest Neo is extraordinary. I'm a side sleeper, and that I sleep really well on that with that. And worst bit of kit, the rucksack liners always tear, don't they?
Which leads us nicely into the camera equipment, really, because I know obviously the camera manufacturers and photography shops like to sell you this vast array of heavy padded bags. Yeah. Now, if you stripped it down to a Z-Packs rucksack, what protection are you actually putting around your photography equipment?
Well, that's a very, very good question, because I think most of the backpacks that are sold simply don't function at all, because for proper outdoor use, I mean, if you get a proper downpour of rain, you have to protect things in some kind of a waterproof container, and there's none out there at all that do that, apart from very heavy duty kind of rubberized zipped bags by Low Alpine, which weigh sort of 3 kilos and uneconomic, and you've got no space for camping back. I use a padded insert, so it's by a company called Mountain Forge, but actually there's an awful lot on eBay and Amazon, about £10. They're called padded insert. I think they're often popular for putting courier bags or handbags, and it's just enough to keep. It weighs less than 200 grams. It's just enough to keep the lenses padded, and then I use a roll and clip canoe bag over that, and I keep that in the mouth of the backpack.
Okay, so let's now actually go on to the photography equipment itself. Then, could you just describe us the range of equipment you take? I'm sure people visualise a pack full of lenses and several cameras and tripods, but I'm sure it can't be that.
No, I've got the whole camera system is I've got it down to 3 kilograms, so it's one body, which is the Canon 5D SR with two zoom lenses, so it's a 24 to 70 and a 70 to 300, and they're image stabilized professional quality lenses. And my approach with sort of abstract images is that I do a lot of work at the longer end of the telephoto. So that lens is kind of quite a beast. It's over a kilo in weight, the lens alone, but it gives me opportunities that a shorter lens wouldn't.
And so that's three items. Then what about the spare batteries and SD cards, obviously?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, the data storage is a huge issue. So I have a huge number of SD cards and quite a huge number of batteries. So I kind of work on a battery lasting 2 days. So if it's 10 days without electricity, I would work on 5 batteries.
So you don't calculate for a stop at some stage to do some charging in a pub or a cafe or something?
That's the ideal process, and when that opportunity arises, I do. But if I can't, I'm camping for a protracted period, I carry more batteries.
Okay. So that's obviously the camera equipment and batteries. What about tripods or monopods, anything like that?
No, I don't. I started with a tripod for the first 1,000 kilometres. I carried a tripod, but I used it so little that I didn't think it justified the weight.
The actual times you take the pictures, you say obviously you work through the day to be in the right place for the light. Is it a general rule of thumb still work for you that is sort of an established one in photography, an hour before sunrise, an hour after sunset is a full day?
Yes, very much so. But it has to be so that those sort of dawn, dusk, golden hour times, it can be quite a cliched time if you're, say, for example, St. Michael's Mount at those times, which I did. I camped specifically to do that. But I wouldn't say it was the picture of this trip that I'm most proud of, because it's very similar to many other types of pictures. It tends to be when something serendipitous happens. There's a weather front passes, there's a massive black sky, a tiny bit of sunlight shines on a particular landmark, or it could be just a farmer's field in a beautiful way. So it's being there at the right moment that gets me excited about this project.
And places that are well known, that you might have in your mind visually before you get there as a tourist spot.
Yes.
Do you find it difficult to actually see it differently? Do you, when you arrive there, as you say, St. Michael's Mount, taking that for an example, it's obviously in your head before you get there.
Yes.
To see the type of images that you're looking for, do you find that quite a difficult process because it's quite imprinted before you in your mind?
Very much so. It's very, very difficult, and especially if I research it and then I see, all the other great photographers' work, and then it can be like, what can I do to add to this? So it is difficult, but I mean because of the walking process is quite meditative, and I think it gives you a different relationship to the landscape because you're there for so long, that I think that can give you an edge, because you can kind of get the smell of the ground in a way that you can't if you turn up by car, get your snazzy gear out and just go for it.
So what do you feel you've learned in this trip so far?
Well, that is a good question. What have I learned? That every kilometre of this country has got some value in and is different in a different charming way. I've learned that the weather forecast is not to be trusted. The even terrible days tend to have a few glimmers of beauty in it, and and in a way the sun always does come out again, and the storms only last a relatively short amount of time, and persevering through it gives rewards. And
do you ever get into conversations with, photography is a common hobby, obviously.
Yes.
There must be many people you've met with assorted equipment, and do you ever get absorbed in photographic conversations halfway through?
So sometimes, it's often this strange moment if it's a beautiful light and other photographers have worked out this is a good time, and you see some other guy with a tripod and there's a sort of a wave and a nod of acknowledgement. But most people in that situation are in the they're in the zone, they want to do their thing. It's often people that talk more about the gear are perhaps not so interested in the artistry of it. But yeah, people do come up and talk about the gear, yeah.
Before we started this interview, we were talking a bit about the life of a commercial photographer,
Yeah.
a freelance photographer these days, and it's a lot tougher than it used to be.
Very much so,
I'd like to just explore that with you a bit, if I may.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it at the moment, actually?
Well, I see it as a healthy thing, because I think what makes a viable commercial photographer is having a creative vision rather than having a particular expensive bit of kit, which used to be the entry parameter in the past. But because professional quality equipment is relatively affordable, it can't be about equipment now. It has to be about having a unique creative vision, which I think is a good thing, because it's not to say in a specialism, whether it's wedding or architecture or landscape, it's highly competitive within those fields. Because creative vision is the defining aspect of photography now, that means that the people are looking for and recognise and value it more, I think, than in the past. So there's more photography in art galleries. There's more interested in the art side of photography than the past. And that sort of coincides with it almost being harder to make it commercially. So it's an interesting world. I think a lot of people spend a lot of money on equipment, and then they get to a point, maybe after a few years of reading the how-to photography magazines, they want to push it a bit further and create their own language. So I think there is an interest in that more than in the past.
And as the project's developed now, here we are, say, 25% of the way through, a quarter of the way through. Have you found the interest in the project around the coastal areas evolving into a much greater interest as you travel?
Yes, very much so. I think people are surprised about what's out there, and so I have sort of faithful followers that follow from the day one, and that kind of increases the further I go around.
So where are you up to now?
Tomorrow I'll be going to Cardiff, so I'm in Glamorgan.
Okay, and is there any particular part of the rest of the trip you've got to do that you're looking forward to?
Well, the next bit I'm really excited about, Tartar Steel, the industrial part of Glamorgan, and then the Gower Peninsula. So you've got the Natural Beauty, Britain's first national park, with this industry. You talked about looking at other people's imagery. I looked for pictures of some of the steelworks near Cardiff, and there were about 5 online. So it's people sort of block out things they don't want to see.
Just as an aside, a practical question really, in something like an industrial area like that, how do you manage regards to wild camping?
I kind of avoid it. I mean, even Tartar Steel, which was Europe's biggest steel plant, it's only a few kilometres long. So I walk on average 26 kilometres a day, up to 40. So I can always go just a bit further out to somewhere that's pleasant. But I do plan in advance approximately where I'm going to camp within a few kilometres, so that I don't get stuck in the middle of a steelworks.
not a good sleeping in the security cabin.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a good idea. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and everybody obviously is going to be looking at your blog and the information and the images that are there, which are superb. But as I always like to do with something like this, because you've had now more experience with the number of people you've spoken to and the interest and the questions you've been asked, of all the things I could have asked you, what should I have asked you?
Oh, wow. I think you touched on it earlier. It's being open to chance when you're on a walking landscape photography project. So to not be too concerned about a specific aim when you start out, and to be open to the chance encounter, be that of weather or the people you meet, and that these random things can lead to a extraordinary voyage of discovery.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Quintin and his project is fascinating, I'm sure you'll agree. So I hope you have a chance to go and look at the perimeter.uk website, and if it takes your fancy, do purchase a picture or two if you like his style. There are 1 or 2 pictures he's allowed me to use on the Outdoor Station website to give you a flavour of the sort of style that he does. But I think it's a great project, and it's certainly really interesting to support it. I look forward to possibly speaking to Quintin when he actually finishes the project and see what he's learned and developed about his style, and of course about the wild camping and some of the adventures he's had en route. So I think that pretty well brings me to an end. I'm not too sure who I'm going to be speaking to over the next 7 days, but I'm certainly going to be speaking to somebody off my list. So do stay tuned for that. I'm trying to release these every Friday if I can. There's loads more of the information on theoutdoorstation.co.uk. There are new videos coming out as well. And of course, please don't forget, do join the newsletter and make some suggestions of people of interest yourself. And to finish off with another one of these outdoor sayings, which I'm picking up as I go along, this one from David Bowie. I don't know where I'm going, but I promise it won't be boring. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.